Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm talking to Byron Lane about Big Gay Wedding. Welcome, Byron.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good morning.
Oh, my pleasure. I enjoyed this so much. So, we've met in person, but I probably didn't tell you then. I cry very easily. I cry over romances, but especially weddings. I'm here to tell you, I went through a whole lot of tissues in this because it was so lovingly done. I loved every minute of it.
Oh, Dan, that really means a lot to me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Except my eyes are probably still puffy. That's not a good thing, Byron.
Oh, come on. Who cares about that?
All right. It was totally worth it. So that's the important part. So give the audience a little setup of what Big Gay Wedding is about. And then we'll get into some particulars.
So Big Gay Wedding is 2 grooms and 1 mother of a problem. And it's basically about a small town and a lady who lives there, and her son is coming home, and she thinks he's coming home to take over the farm. She runs this small farm for misfit animals, like parrots or macaws that curse, and so no one wants them, or a sheep that has 3 legs, and she's ready to retire. And so her son comes home, but instead of taking over the farm, he's there to tell her that he's met someone and he wants to have a wedding there and marry his future husband. And this is a small town. She's conservative, and so this doesn't sit very well with her.
In reading this, it reminded me of growing up in Eastern North Carolina. Some of the same attitudes, some of the same love too. It's important that I think in telling gay love stories, we know that there can be a horrible world out there, but there can be a lot of wonderful people as well, and they are littered throughout your book, which I love that. So, Chrissy, Chrissy is I felt such a kinship with Chrissy because that's the mother of Barnett, because she talks to both the animals, living and dead. And I love that because there's a bit of the spirit I think you must have on a farm. Did you grow up on a farm or out in the country?
Yeah, I grew up in the country. So I was born in New Orleans, and then my family moved to a part of Louisiana they call the North Shore, which is just north of New Orleans. And it's just country enough. My dad wanted 5 acres, and there were rumblings about living in the country and not having close neighbors and getting a little bit away from the government and that kind of vibe. So we were in this really rural area, and I think maybe in his heart there's there's a little farmer inside my dad, but really he was a construction worker and did that kind of stuff. He was a contractor, so he built the house that we lived in.
All right.
And he and my mom separated. So there was some when I was young, and so there was some elements of like all those things from childhood I try to bring into my work. So in Big Gay Wedding, there's the parents are not together. The dad, early on, you find out that the dad has died, and so the mom is alone there. And when it came to my own coming out story, my mom was really, really supportive, and my dad took a long time to kind of come around. And so in Big Gay Wedding, it really is a kind of a similar dynamic. It's the mom. Well, it's the opposite. It's the mom who's sort of having a coming out experience, and she's coming out as having to love and accept her gay son. And we keep the dad's voice there, the critical voice, because really I grew up and I still hear my dad's thoughts in my head. My dad's voice.
I think we do. I heard one time years ago that children are simply an extension of their parents, and that type of nurture thing that we all experience as children of someone, that we do carry their voices with them. Sometimes I have to tell my mother to hush.
Yes.
Quite often.
Yes, right on. That's a really important skill, and something it took me many, many years to finally be like, you know what, I'm not having imaginary arguments with my parents in my head anymore, and I try to catch it.
I do too. The thing is, they were an influence on us, but so Chrissy is such a loving mother to to Barnett, in my opinion. And when I first met Victoria, which is Ezra's mom, I thought, oh my God, what a drama queen. They're so different. But as the story unfolds, to me, they became very, very similar in their motherly love.
Yeah, in the movie Barbie, Ken's job is beach. And lately I've been thinking about life and how my job is just human. My job is to be human. And when I think about these characters, Chrissy and her son Barnett and Barnett's fiance Ezra, they're all doing a really good job of being human too. So I try to give all these characters the same kind of flaws, and maybe it's a flaw, but we also love it. These kind of qualities in the book too, and they're fun to write. They're fun for me to read. And to be honest with you, like, they're fun to have as a next door neighbor or a friend. And sometimes those kind of dynamics can make life really interesting, really hard sometimes too. Sometimes humans are mean, and it can be tough, but also it can be rich, and you meet these great characters in life.
I agree with you. And sometimes the crazier the character, good or bad, is the one that you find you're attracted to most, because they offer something maybe different than we have in our own lives.
Yes, like in Wizard of Oz, when when Glenda comes down, and it's just offering a different perspective. And sometimes that can be someone who lives outside of the box, can really offer something really, really magical to our lives.
So one thing that, besides it being a gay love story, so beautifully written and so wonderfully received, there's quite a bit of death in this book, which was a little surprising, but I think ultimately not surprising to me at all, because I didn't grow up on a farm, but I had relatives that had farms, and life and death are very, very prevalent on a farm. They're part of everyday life, because you can't get away from a farm. A farm is 7 days a week. How important was the inclusion of death to you in writing this story?
In all my work, I try to make it as realistic as possible. And death is a part of life. And I think some people are really comfortable with that, and some people don't want to talk about it at all. And you're right, on a farm, that is going to be a part of the process. And some of the animals on the farm, well, all the animals on the farm are misfits in their own way. The macaws that curse, the three-legged sheep, on and on. And here you have this, the keeper of the farm, Christy, the mom, who also sort of has a misfit son, a gay son that she views as a misfit because he's gay. And so really her journey through the life and death of some of the animals, the life and death that she saw in her own life with her husband dying very early in the book. That's out of the way. Don't panic.
Yes, there's no harming of a husband.
It's part of her journey.
Yes.
And the death also, she also experiences, we hope, a death of some bigotry and some biases and things like that. So hopefully, this is an adventure where you can laugh and you can feel some emotion and some heart, and also feel like, hey, I recognize some of these people in my own life.
That's true. And before we started the recording, I told you that for me, the death parts were really so appropriate, because I mean, it is part of life. We're born, we live, we die. I mean, it is a fact that all of us are going to do that at some point. Hopefully not today, but you know what I'm saying. So,
oh yeah. I think that it makes, being honest about that makes life sometimes more interesting, and makes colors a little brighter when you can appreciate all of it.
I agree. And I think it makes life sweeter too, because it gives us a reminder that today is the day we have to live for.
Yeah.
And
also, sorry.
That's all right. That's something that one of your characters mentions in the book. And that's something that it's very important in our daily lives. I'm going to preach a little bit. If you're not living today, then all of a sudden if you're focused on yesterday or tomorrow, you're missing out on today.
Yeah. Yes.
And that was beautiful in your writing, that we got to experience today often.
Oh, thank you. Well, listen, I love therapy and I love self-help stuff. And sometimes I can't help but try to sneak it in there if I can. And I'll tell you a little perk I give myself. It's a little indulgent, but I'll get the digital version of my books after they come out, and you can see which sections people are highlighting. Anyone can look at that in any book. any ebook. And often the sections that people are highlighting, the popular passages, are these kind of bits of wisdom that you get from the grandpa. Or in my first book, there was a therapist, and people are underlining all the advice that the therapist is giving. And I have to tell you, that's so meaningful to me, because those are things that were meaningful in my own life, and I'm just thrilled that people respond.
That's amazing. I didn't know that was something you could see. I think that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And Papa was one of my all-time favorites. And so there comes a wisdom, hopefully, as you get closer to death. And Papa's realization of his life and where he is in his life, where he is in his lane, is just so touching. And his love was just so beautifully written.
Thank you. Yeah, Papa was really fun to write. He's a crusty old guy who is in a nursing home, and he's in his final years. And but at the nursing home, they all watch Glee, so he's hip to these things. So here you've got a kind of a conservative town, and a conservative, you'd think, older guy, but yet he's been enlightened in some way, and he's able to bring this perspective to the family. And those scenes were really fun to write.
I loved it. I loved it. It was so fun. And here is the most important thing in your entire book. I'm going to speak for you, and it is shoes don't lie.
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm so happy that you like that. I'm so happy.
That is my favorite thing. So we talked about dads. So that was my mother. First thing she did was look at someone's feet. Wow. And I, in an office building, can tell you who's coming by me just by the sound of their walk. Some people notice that, shoes really do tell you a lot about the person.
Mm-hmm. That's really true. And, that's true all by itself. And a layer of that is one of my favorite authors is Chuck Palahniuk. And he has a book called Consider This. Consider This is Chuck Palahniuk's writing book. I was about to say Stephen King also has a great writing book called On Writing. But in Chuck Palahniuk's book, Consider This, he talks about in setting the scene and describing your characters, sometimes if you think about, well, what are they doing with their feet? It helps ground the scene and makes the character richer on the page. And so some of that is related to that too. I was thinking to myself, like, what are these characters doing with their feet? And then that led me to shoes. And it really is true. You can kind of, in Chrissy's world, she can define people by their shoes.
I love that. And I think that also gives the reader just a little bit more insight to her personality, because that's so important to her. And, I love that. So in real life, is Byron Lane a list maker or a winger?
I'm a list maker. I like to be organized. I have an outline for my writing. I have a to-do list every morning. I put things on the calendar, even if they happen every week. So I'm kind of a list guy.
All right. I love it. I love it. At your wedding to Stephen, were you a winger or a lister? Did you have your nuptials prepared in advance, or did you wing it?
Oh yeah, I had them all prepared. Stephen was a little bit more of a wing it kind of guy. But no, I had everything written out. And in fact, our officiant, I had all of her stuff written out too. So I'm not messing around when it comes to that.
I love it. So because I'm interviewing you, I make lists. If I'm being interviewed, I never make a list. I have both personalities, and probably to the detriment of myself.
You got this. And
I'm gonna make it to the end one way or another.
I love it. And the mom makes a list in the book, and that came a little bit from real life too. So sometimes I call my mom in the morning when I'm walking the dogs or something, and I'll ask her what's going on, or I'll tell her what's going on in the story. And in real life, when my sister was getting married, she had some questions for my brother-in-law, and she would write them down. And she and my brother-in-law had lunch, and she brought this list of things, and she told me this story, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect for Chrissy. And so I love when little bits like that can make their way into the book.
I did too, and of course I think that I could see Chrissy checking off her list too. I mean, it was a very visual thing. So the major sections of your book starts with a little quote from Miss Jenny Lafitte, The Undisputed Guide to Respectable Southern Nuptials. And
Mhm.
I learned from you that all of this is made up.
Yep, that's right.
What inspired that?
Well, first of all, I was obsessed with the pirate Lafitte, and so at the time that I was writing this book, I was also reading about the history of that guy. So I thought I'm going to name this lady Lafitte, but I wanted some device to frame the idea that the idea of marriage has changed so much over the many years that humans have been engaged in it. And so I thought it'd be great to have some kind of grounding introduction to the different parts of the book that kind of clued you in on, just a few decades ago, how different traditions were, things that we would look back now and be like, God, that's so weird, or thank God we don't do that anymore. And so it was a little bit of a grounding thing. And I'll tell you, as soon as I sent a draft in to my editor, he wrote me back and was like, these quotes. And that's kind of all he wrote. And I was like, wait, do you like them? Do you not like them? Like, but he did. He liked them, and he was like, "Is this real?" And so I'm glad that they felt authentic enough, and that they were able
They
to.
felt authentic enough that I Googled it. And
Oh,
when I
that's
couldn't
great.
find anything, I'm like, okay, this must be the author's imagination taking over.
Yes,
Which
yes.
which I think, that's something also, Byron, that I think that you did so well is, in these little lists from Miss Jeannie Lafitte, we see that aspect of Southernism that everything must be perfect. We have to have the perfect wedding. We have to have the perfect funeral. We have to have the perfect prom. Sadly, Southerners are so rich in color, but yet we have these lists of things that we must do to make something perfect. And in reality, nothing is ever really perfect.
Yes.
So, but I find that because I was thinking about, growing up, you had things by Miss Manners and stuff like that. These were the things that you absolutely had to do. You couldn't stray away from them. And it put so much pressure on what should be such a beautiful moment.
Mhm. There's so much wasted time in this thing about perfection. And even in my own coming out journey, my dad and I have a great relationship now, but it was strained for a while because of this gay thing. And
Yes.
now it's sort of okay, but a lot of things happened in between, including in many people's lives, churches changing their views on all that. And it's so much wasted time, all this bigotry and hate. And it's also so weird because, as you say, like, people in the South where I'm from seem to me to have such huge hearts, big loving hearts, except sometimes these things get in the way. This homophobia, sometimes it's racism, and it's so strange how people can be so loving and such big personalities, and yet there are these walls. you
Right.
know
I totally agree. We're hopefully trying to get society to move to a much more loving and gentle place. It's still a job to be
It's a
done.
job. It's a job. It's a full-time job, Dan.
It is indeed. So, did you have a favorite character to write?
Ezra was my favorite to write. So the other groom, Ezra, and I think that's because he's a little bit more of the hippie, self-helpy type guy. But I tried to make him a grounding voice, and also just different enough from the mom, Chrissy, that she's put off by him, but he doesn't say things that are untrue. So she also has to sort of concede that, and he also has a lot to learn from her, about growth and about family and really letting your heart be filled. So he was my favorite to write for all those reasons.
Well, and I loved it. His vibes comment just warmed my heart. I loved
Oh,
that. So that was so cute.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. That was from a friend. You can see, as I'm describing, like, writers sometimes, and you probably know this too, like, pluck from wherever they can. And Stephen, my husband, and I were at in Puerto Vallarta with our friend Chris, who's a teacher, and he was talking about this a color-coded method that some teachers use to sort of gauge where children's emotions are. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. I'm going to give that to Ezra. And that's why Ezra ended up being a teacher. He was something else for a while. And
All right.
it's just so funny how things kind of come together.
I love it. Yes, and I think that's the beauty of when you read a good book. If you understand that it really comes from reality, especially something like this type of book. I like the reality of it, the realism of it. If I love, and so it's a nice thing to read, and it's fun, even though it makes me cry a lot.
Oh, Dan, I love that. That's my favorite kind of book to read too.
I do. I really do. That or it's either that or the opposite end where I want a whole bunch of people to die. I don't have much of a middle ground, sadly.
Oh, good for you. I love it. You know what you like and you find it.
Yes, I do. I totally go out looking for it. That's for sure.
Good.
Byron, I've had such a great time. Do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
Yeah, I'm at byronlane.com, and that's got all the links. And I think pretty much everything else is at Byron Lane, except for Instagram. There's some other Byron Lane out there who beat me to it. So on Instagram, I'm byronlane.com, but it's DOTCOM.
Perfect.
But yeah, I'm out there.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining me. I had such a wonderful time. Again, the book is Big Gay Wedding, and it is absolutely delicious. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks, Dan. I appreciate you.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.